2009,
Yeah.
the women's group is having their function, and Melitta Lorsch is going to tell us all about what? All about Eve. Oh, all about Melitta. All about Shanghai.
Yes.
And who's that right next to her? Please identify yourself, lady.
Bernice.
Why are you so...
Berman.
Say it loud.
Bernice Berman, a good friend of Melitta's.
Yes.
Okay. All right, we
Yes.
tested.
And Al.
Signing off.
Well, it's not.
And he's walking not that good, and he's afraid of my bones being fragile. So,
I think they're beautiful. Joyce Sapin schlepped food from ShopRite for us. And the custodial staff did some of the other work. And it's going to be a lovely evening, except for the rain. In order for us to stay on schedule, we must start now, so I'm going to do the introduction. While listening to a presentation by Will Wiekand from the JDC, he was talking about the situation of Jews in Argentina and in Venezuela. Somehow, the conversation turned to a former JDC worker named Laura Margolis. She had been sent to Cuba to negotiate for the passengers on the ship St. Louis. And we all know that in this congregation we have somebody who was on the St. Louis, Fred Buff. She said that she felt like a failure because she could only get the Cuban government to accept 2 elderly Jews into Cuba while the rest were turned away. Her next assignment was in Shanghai, which was an open port that required no visa to enter. She was the one who literally went nose to nose with the Japanese, telling them to keep their hands off the Jews. She would feed them, and for 3 years she ran the soup kitchen. Recently, there was a movie called Shanghai Ghetto, and there's also a book out called Shanghai Diary by Ursula Bacon. The experiences there are a little bit different from those of our own Melitta Lorsch. We are very fortunate in this congregation to have people who lived through important events in Jewish history. Unfortunately, we don't take advantage of that fact. And a lot of the people who should be here tonight to hear about these experiences, people like me who were born after World War II, are home. Just a quick rundown about Melitta. She was in Shanghai and then she came to America as a child. She attended the Fashion Institute of Technology. She's been honored by UJA Federation. And she and her husband Fred were co-honorees with the Rosenblatts at the 2005 JCCP Journal Dinner. And there is an expression, Rabbi, I don't know where the citation is, that to save one life is to save a whole world. Well, Melitta is the mother of 2 sons. She has 2 daughters-in-law and 1 grandson. So from Melitta and Fred have come 2 more generations. Melitta, without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce Melitta Lorsch.
Thank you, Evie. The Shanghai story, an escape from Berlin to the memories of Shanghai. Where shall I begin? It was so long ago. I was 5 years old. After Kristallnacht, my beloved father had the foresight to get my mother, grandmother, my sister, and me out of the unbearable conditions of Germany. We already had moved from a small town in eastern Germany where conditions were bad. We now were in Berlin, living in 1 room, 1 block from the Gestapo headquarters. When I went outside, the girl next door took my beautiful doll. When I explained, she said, "Where you're going, you won't need it." When I came to my mother crying, she urged me not to say anything. She said, "Shh," because we were afraid, because we were so close to the Gestapo headquarters. I grew up without a doll. I can still see my little doll, and I'll show the picture later of the doll with us. My father found out that the only port open in to German Jews was Shanghai, which was under Japanese occupation. So, with the little money he had and our German passports, he paid the passage to Shanghai in China. As a child, I didn't know where China was, let alone Shanghai. We traveled to Italy by train, then to Barcelona, Spain. We were limited to what we could take with us. No jewelry, only my parents' wedding rings. No money, and only 2 suitcases of clothing. At Barcelona, we boarded a Japanese freighter, the Hakusaki Maru, which was overloaded with more passengers than it was designed to carry. As we passed through the Suez Canal, some people jumped ship and planned to make it to Palestine. We never found out if they made it. After a long ocean voyage in September of 1939, we arrived in Shanghai, China. It was a very hot day, and my father had to carry our 2 overloaded suitcases and ended up with a double hernia. Upon leaving the ship, we were transported by cattle trucks to Kinshu-Heim, which is camp. Heim, which is put in German. The refugees who had arrived before us had organized a committee to run the camp, and they showed us our quarters to live in. We were taken to a large room which housed more than 250 people, families with children and single people. We just had a bed with a sheet in between for privacy. Some privacy, that was. We were provided with food from the central kitchen. Professionals and refugees made themselves available to help. They also had a hospital and doctor's station, which was set up by the refugees in the camp. My mother was hospitalized with pneumonia, and a little later, my father got TB, and thank God they both survived. My father's sister and brother-in-law died from the dreadful conditions in Shanghai, and they left my cousin an orphan, which was a boy. Education was very important. The money for the school was donated by Sir Horace Kaduri and the Sassoon family. Their generosity will never be forgotten. We attended the SJYA school, which is the Shanghai Jewish Youth Association. Classes were from kindergarten to high school. In the morning, we attended SJYA school, and in the afternoon, we attended the Beis Jacob in Rachel Moshe Mir Yeshiva. We then were moved to Pinglingheim, which is camp, that did not last long, and we moved again to Seward camp, which is also, we call it Heim, but it's camp. We got a little room that was for families, and we considered ourselves very lucky. We had a bed for my parents, and I slept between my father and my mother. I didn't have a bed. I slept in the crack.
Tell them how old you were.
What?
Tell them how old you were at the time.
In how old?
When you were sleeping between your mother and your father.
In the last camp, maybe 9 years old.
Okay.
My sister had the upper bunk. She was lucky. She had to climb up. The room was so small that there was no room for my cousin who lost his parents. And it made it doubly hard. My father wanted a son so badly, but he couldn't take him because there were 2 girls in there and there was no room in that. The room was small. So an aunt and uncle who were childless raised the boy in another camp, which was Shafron camp. And that was good, but he wanted to be with us. That was the problem. You may wonder what happened to Grandma. She was with us in Shanghai after a year, was able to get passage to America, ending up with family in the Bronx. That was with my grandfather. My grandfather, because of a mix-up, was in Holland and got passage to Palestine and then to America. We had relatives in Palestine at that time, and we had relatives in America. And they gave passage so my grandmother could come over at that time. Of course, when the war was over, we also got passage because of them. You may also wonder about whether we had kosher food. At the first camp that we went to, the food was not kosher. And my father spoke up, and we then went to another camp where they served us kosher food. How they did that, I was too young to know. We were like in a ghetto. Actually, we were in a ghetto because, I'll explain it. Things were restricted. On one side of the street we lived, which were the Chinese and the refugees. Across the street was occupied by Japan, and our camp was closed. The gate got closed. We could not go out without any permission or a pass. The refugees were across the street and under the Japanese occupation. There were 5 camps: Alcott Camp, Wayside Camp, Watwood Camp, Shelburne Camp, and Seward Camp. We were in 3 camps, and the Seward Camp was our last camp. The camps were set up in designated areas, and we needed a pass to go from camp to camp, and the pass was issued by the Japanese commander, who called himself the King of the Jews. His name was Goya. He was very famous in Shanghai, little Goya. Okay. Adults as well as school children got passes, and they were good until we returned from school. We studied English and English courses, and before the war was over, we started to learn Japanese, but that didn't go very far. I didn't learn much. I learned how to count and started a poem, and that's the end. At the Seward camp, we lined up in long lines for mealtime, and each refugee had a pot in their hand. Each person received 1 scoop of food. There were no snacks during the day. You surely could not get fat. When the war was over in 1945, we received K-rations, which were military rations that were issued to American soldiers. The K-rations were not all that edible, and the army kosher salami was sometimes moldy. In the camp, there was a canteen. When we went sometimes, where we went sometimes when it rained, my father would chase us out. Later we found out that there was a small room in a canteen that was on the left-hand side with a curtain in front of it, and they had a shortwave radio, and the men were listening in to what was going on during the war in Germany. And my father and my mother were very sad looking. I didn't know why, but to some extent they knew what was happening to their families in Europe. As I write this, I remember that life went on, but all sorts of problems for us and the Chinese existed. Starvation, poverty was rampant among all. Begging Chinese children, pitifully dressed in rags, which was awful, could be found sitting in the streets. I can still hear their voices. No mama, no papa, no mipo, which meant bread, no chow chow, which meant food. Dead bodies with disease, flies, mosquitoes in every vacant field. The stench of dead Chinese babies wrapped in straw were left along the fence alongside our camp. When we were playing, we'd smell something, we'd see that little bundle wrapped up. They would just dump the kids. It was awful. We had rats, mice, fleas, flies, mosquitoes, disease, dirt, filth, and lice. At the first sign of lice in our hair, my mother used these lice combs, combed our hair. She washed our hair with vinegar to get out the lice, and we had our hairs braided. So we had braids until we left Shanghai. which was something weren't too happy about. Some young girls already had cut their hair, and my mother said, "No way, you're not cutting your hair. I don't want to have anything happen that you get more lice." So we had to keep the braids until we were ready to board the ship, and then we had a haircut and a permanent wave, and we could go. Okay. The war was over in Europe, and now it came to us in Shanghai. We got bombed 2 times a day, once at noontime and once at night. There was no such a thing as bunkers. We could not dig a bunker, since the groundwater was so high the Yangtze River would overflow, so there's no way to have any bunkers. We took shelter during these attacks by sitting on our beds with the upper bunk my sister had as our only protection, or crawling under the beds, some protection for an American bomb. We could set our clocks by the alarm, and we could decide beforehand where we could be at the time of the attacks. They came like clockwork regularly. One attack occurred while we were in school. We saw the horror with a panic, and we ran. I sat on these little chairs and tables that they had where you climb under, and it lit up the whole wall, which there was a lot of glass in the classroom, and it was horrible, the sound. We didn't even ask how to get out of the school territory. Everyone started running and in panic. And that was what we could set up. One attack occurred while we were in school, and we saw the horror. I'm repeating that with a panic. Another time, we were allowed by the Japanese to enter a big building. We were told that it would be for safety. When the second wave of bombs came, the refugees were rushing to go there. My father had a large bag of rice, so that we had food in case there was no food around. Inside the building, there were sacks lined up on many of the stairways. We did not know what was in the sacks. When we came to New York, our dentist had a brother who flew the bombing mission over Shanghai, and he said that the Japanese had distributed leaflets and told them not to bomb that building since it held refugees. We found out that the sacks were protecting ammunition stored in the building. The Japanese used the refugees as a shield to protect the building. There was rubble and dead people in the streets. We all survived the bombing, but some people were not so fortunate. Our school, at least this I think is going back from the article when I left the school, and this happened, this incident. The second one is something that actually followed. But some people were not so fortunate. Our school was U-shaped, and the walls were mostly glass. That's what I was describing. In the bombing raid, a bomb fell close to the building, and we saw a bright flash, and the glass walls shattered. In August 1945, the war with Japan was over. We were very low-key in the celebration until we knew that the war was really over, and then were free. We were the lucky ones. We had an early quota to leave for America. We boarded the Army ship, the SS Gordon, sometime in March of 1947. As we left the dock, we saw the Chinese men and women working in the rice fields near the shore. Our ship was supposed to make a stop at Hawaii, but in the middle of the Pacific, a ship broke in half, and the crew were holding onto the mast. So we stopped, rescued the crew, and continued on to San Francisco for a hero's welcome. We were all very excited to go to America and see Grandpa and Grandma. But life is not always sweet. Grandpa had died 9 months before we arrived in America. After we came to America, I experienced nightmares. Whenever the practice of air raid sirens went off, I wanted to crawl under my bed, and I also dreamt about it. And when I dreamt about it and woke up, I realized I couldn't crawl under the bed. I was not anymore in Shanghai. It took a long time before I overcame this feeling that the bombing had not happened anymore. I thank God that I met Fred and 2 sons and daughter-in-laws and my grandson Adam. And I thank God that I live in America. As an afterthought, about 6 years ago, I and 4 others spoke at the Golden Oldies about our experience under the Nazi rule. I thank you for listening to me, and I want to thank especially Yashikoa to Edith Free for asking me to speak, and also to Al Nahum for making my edition in editing in a very large print for me, which you spent some time on that. And thank you all for being here to listen to me, to my story. Thank you.
We have about 2 or 3 minutes if anybody would like to ask questions of Melitta. Just raise your hand. You have hands?
Edith, over here, the rabbi.
Rabbi?
Melitta, how many Jews were living in Shanghai during the war?
I think they said 15 or 18,000.
Rita, come to the mic.
Come to the mic.
Melita, go to the mic.
I heard that they said 15 to 18,000. They didn't all live in the ghetto. Those that had money, that came to Shanghai with money, they lived in lanes or they lived above the Bund, and they were self-sufficient. Some opened businesses up, and they didn't need the support. They went to another school above the Bund, so they didn't go to the area. Those that were in camp did not have anything. They came empty-handed.
Anybody else? Fran?
Is all the money that was supporting those 2 people you mentioned? How were you supported? Just by 2 philanthropists or?
I believe it was America supported it. We also got donations from there was some were not perfect condition, and they say you can have 1 sweater, you can have 1 skirt, or you can have 1 thing, and you're glad you got some clothes because we didn't have a wardrobe. In fact, when it was winter and it was very cold, what we did, my mother put under, we wore slacks. She put under the slacks, we kept our pajamas under to keep warm. We had no clothes.
Dan?
How did this material get to China, which was under Japanese occupation, if it was coming from the United States? You know?
You want to explain it?
It was 1939. We were not at war with Japan until 1941. So there was still commerce between the United States and Japan and parts of China.
But what after that?
After 1941, all commerce between Japan, U.S., and China stopped. And they got their sustenance from the local Japanese authorities.
He's asking about we got clothing, yes? Okay. During the war, my mother was very handy. She could make out of nothing something. And she would get some fabric from somebody, or my father would get rather some fabric. And friends that had a machine would let her use the machine, and she made clothes for us. In fact, she made for my sister the same thing as for me. And she put layers on the bottom, like steps. So when we grew, she put took a layer out. And this way we could wear the clothes for a long, long time. As far as shoes were concerned, if the shoes were too small, she cut the fronts off so the toes could come out in the front, that we could wear our shoes. There was ways. My mother was, and then in camp people would say, my parents must have money because I were dressed very well. But it was my mother. She could turn something from nothing. She could do something. That's the way she was.
Anyone else?
Melitta, is there I guess a network or organization of Jews? Is there a network or organization of Jews that you belong to who were interned in Shanghai ghetto?
In Shanghai?
Yeah, but presently, is there an organization or network that you never belong to?
And at this point? No, there was one. My parents, when they lived in New York, they belonged to one, and they used to attend the groups, but that was only the parents. We were the children. So that fell apart. The eldest died away. Yes.
So there's no second generation?
Yes, there were reunions every so often from the younger generations, one in Philadelphia, one in Israel, one in California, one was in the Concord. They had it in different places. And then people that wanted to attend and wanted to meet their friends, they attended.
Anyone else?
Rabbi?
How did the Japanese treat you while you were there?
Not bad. They were told not to treat us badly, except if some people were out of line. That had nothing to do with being Japanese. It could be a refugee. And Goya was very stern. He wouldn't treat them right. He would, or if somebody crossed over when they shouldn't at the time, some of them were jailed as well. But basically, not bad, not bad. But as far as it went on, when the war continued and it was over in Europe, we got the brunt of it because the Japanese were trying to fight America. And right across from our camp, on the rooftop, they were trying to shoot down the planes. Our place was moving, the building. In some instances, the rooftops, they were so thin, the shrapnels went right through. People were hit by shrapnels if they weren't indoors at the time.
Michael?
They were killed.
First of all, I'd like to thank Melitta. That was an absolutely wonderful talk.
Thank you.
Sort of, I can speak for myself, certainly enlightened me in terms of what went on at that period of time. I was just curious to know, maybe you know the answer to this question, maybe not, I'm not sure. How far back does the Shanghai Jewish community go in terms of presence?
I don't get the point.
Was there established Jewish community in Shanghai?
Yes, the community already started to form before we arrived, before 1939. When we came, there were those that already welcomed us. The cattle cars were unloading us from the boats and took us already to the first camp. And there was a hospital there, which I was hospitalized in the first year for overnight. So there was already an active community flourishing. The refugees that came from Europe, whether they were doctors, dentists, or other professionals, they made themselves available immediately to help each other throughout the years. It was very good.
Shell?
Melitta, we were at the camp. Were all the people in the camp treated as Jews, or were some treated as Germans?
Well, not all. They basically were, but you had in between where a Jewish man brought his non-Jewish wife along. And we had two of them like that in camp. Like I have a picture where the daughters are on the picture. And the relationship was not good between those couples because they took them, the wives, one of the couples that they took along, and there was a lot of restraint between that couple. She was going to go back and leave him afterwards. that this was a mixed marriage. But basically, it was all Jews, yes, from Austria, from Poland, from all over. They came from all different parts of Europe that stayed and came to Shanghai because that was the port that was open.
Estelle?
I'm wondering about the nitty-gritty of your everyday life. You said that you were given, you lined up with the pot for the food. Was the family, was your mother able to make some meals herself? Or did she have any facilities in the one room? She doesn't do it.
Was your mother
The food. Where did you eat?
Did your mother have any facilities to make food for you?
Oh yes, my mother had in the room that we had, she had little hibachi, and she was able to warm food up on that, and she tried to cook something even on it. One day it was very cold. She took the hibachi in. She almost got poisoned because the fumes from the cold really came out. And that was the last time she brought it in. It was on like a fire escape. But yes, she prepared some things on it. Yes. I remember certain things.
What about the weather? How did you adjust to the weather?
Tropical. You could get hail coming down, and it was so hot you didn't have anything to cool off. And the conditions as far as washing and bath facilities, it was not easy because there was nothing except in the beginning of the camp in the lane. And if I describe the condition, I don't really want to describe it. It was not, unless you really want to know it.
Suffices to say they were very unpleasant.
And very unpleasant. That's exactly what it was. And taking a shower with women together and children and men together with boys, and there were only designated times that you couldn't. It was not on a daily basis at all. So,
Anyone else?
Mention this.
and then you had to brew everything. Fruit was a luxury. If I got an apple, my mother would cut it in half and I would scrape on it as long as I can. It should last because there was no fruit and it had to be brewed and had to be peeled because you shouldn't get sick. But we survived. We survived very, very well. We had the comfort of our parents, security, and that's what mattered. So, as a child, that's all you need.
Show them the sack.
Yeah. This is the bag. It's kind of faded out. I should have never done it years ago.
In here.
When my father put the rice, this is the sack. The writing is still on it from Shanghai. Where my father would have the rice in. It was a big rice bag if you open it up, and he would carry that along when the air raid attack came so that we would have some food to eat in case we shouldn't starve. So we had that, which was wonderful. He was thinking of us first. Okay, and something else that shows the doll. Here. This is what the girl threw at me. Was the dress. She ripped off one of the tassels, threw the dress down, and that I could keep. The doll she kept. And I have a picture of when my sister and I, we have the doll in the middle. We have the doll. Here. Here's a picture if anybody wants to see it. That's the two of us, here the two of us, the doll, and has that dress on that they ripped off. And that's the only memory. This is another thing, the room we had. That was after the war was over. We sent my grandmother, my mother sent this to my grandmother when I made the picture, and she wrote the letter on the back to my grandparents at that time, but I think my grandfather must have been gone. Now, there are not 2 suitcases, there are 4 of them up there. My father brought only 2. But the reason there were 4 is because when the war was over, my father had a friend, Mr. Turner, and he had a luggage place. And my father helped him sell luggage. So he did help. It was very interesting. There's a lot of story to go with it. The man was very appreciative. So we ended up with 4 suitcases there on top. Not only that, I have on the picture my teddy bear. That's all I ever had is a teddy bear, and I love teddy bears. I also have a picture of a doll on there. That was all in my mind. The doll was gone, but I still hoped for a doll, so I put it on. And that's one of the pictures. Yeah, that's all I have. This is when my grandfather was in Palestine with my grandmother's sister. Oh, I'm sorry. I have also an album where there's some pictures in. It shows the soup kitchen, what it's like, and the sleeping quarters in the camp where people were all together, and how they stand on line for food. Some of these pictures are in here, in this album, if anybody would like to look at it. That depends on how Fred feels, whatever he does.
Melitta, thank you very much. We appreciate it. And we especially appreciate it because we know that not all of the memories are pleasant. Rabbi Cantor, would you please Kiddush and Motzi and blessing the children? Wait, we have to do candles first. Candles will be done. For anyone who wants to light candles, we're going into the kitchen. I'm a little famished today.
Again, for those who have not lit candles at this time, I'd like to make the way to the dairy side of the kitchen for lit benches and do so at this time.
Is there anybody we can alert that we're freezing to death in here? I just stubbed my own toe. No. And she went where? And she left the